Gentle from the Futures Program at SAIA, and I will be moderating this webinar. The topic talks about futures, which was plural rather than singular, future of critical minerals. To counter the notion of only one future, it further asserts that the future cannot be predicted, but we can prepare for many futures by creating alternatives and preferred futures. It places the research agenda within a different paradigm, highlighting that future alternatives are possible. Our discussion today aims to delve into the strategic policy choices of critical minerals and the mining sector within the SADC region, while highlighting the impacts of anticipatory governance over the long term. The research further highlights moving from reactive policymaking to being proactive. It highlights the benefits of going slow a bit to go far. I'm sure you have come across headlines in your news feed highlighting the scramble for Africa or the scramble for Africa's minerals. And it makes you think of chaos and not well thought out. In this research, we point to anticipatory governance, which is more forward-looking by exploring alternative economies which benefits more people. Further, we intend to highlight the intricate landscape of uncertainties in the mining sector by honing in on diverse scenarios, by exploring how these uncertainties could interplay by the year 2035. The scenarios further unveil potential opportunities, but also caution against pitfalls while pursuing economic prosperity for the people in the SADC region. The research reports are freely available on the SAIA website. Please engage with the questions, additions you may have as we collectively build on the body of knowledge in this domain. During this webinar, we hope to contribute to this collective endeavor of shaping more resilient and prosperous futures of critical minerals in the SADC region as we explore these uncharted policy horizons. I'm honored to introduce our esteemed panelists today and also provide an overview of the agenda. First, we have Dr. Dion Cloete from SAIA, who is the head of our Futures Program and also the lead project investigator of this research. He'll provide an overview of our research findings and how we came to the policy recommendations. Next, as our panelist, we have Dr. Marit Ketau, who is the Interim Director of the African Minerals Development Center. Marit is an experienced economist working on natural resources for economic transformation and sustainable development in Africa, with extended experience working on minerals for sustainable development. We look forward to gaining insights from Marit on this research study as well. And the next on our agenda, we hear from Ms. Sitapani Mohale, Chief Director of Mineral Policy, Promotion and International Coordination of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy in South Africa. Sitapani will provide insights with specific reference to the South African context, while research provides a regional perspective. Last not but Senior Program Officer of Value Chains, Directorate of Industrial Development and Trade, and also the Southern African Development Community Secretariat, SADC. We hear so much about shortened and more resilient value chains, and I'm sure that Calasius is going to invite all participants to pose questions to our panelists by typing it in the chat Q&A functionality, and with that Q&A session, we will conclude the webinar. With that, I hand over to Dion, who will provide some insights to the research findings. Thank you, Dion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Letitia, and thanks to everybody joining today. We look forward to really share this journey we had of exploring and better understanding the futures of critical minerals in SADC. Let me kick off by just also saying that the research is on our website. We've just shared the links in the chat as well, and how to get the different outputs of the work that we created. Now, so I'll first provide a project overview, and then I'll delve into the different special reports that we delivered from the research. So we have a policy briefing that is kind of a project overview and highlights the key dimensions at play and summarizes the 4 special reports. And then we have each of the special reports, the first of which focuses on the general explorations of understanding the challenges and barriers and enablers in the critical minerals ecosystem. We have the second report focusing on how we could navigate the challenges, but also how we could navigate the transition towards the preferred futures in SADC. Then we've got the special report 3 that really tries to reimagine how the future by 2035 to 2050 might look like in terms of the critical minerals ecosystem, and really to explore what is required to build anticipatory governance in the region. The last of the special reports, the 4th one, focuses on the systemic innovations and the strategic framework that we have developed. That is a draft strategic framework that points to the draft policy recommendations, or what we would say the strategic priorities and activities that we invite all participants to engage with us, to co-explore and to continue the dialogue and debate of how we want to see the futures of critical minerals in SADC. So, as I said, the work that we endeavored and the aim of the project was to critically explore and build anticipatory governance with key mining stakeholders, critical mineral stakeholders in Southern Africa over the last year. And our aim was to explore the high impact key uncertainties from the global transitioning commodity and energy ecosystems. So from that, we had 5 different workshops in total that we ran with different stakeholders. And these stakeholders included the African Minerals Development Center, the Mining Industry Association of Southern Africa. We had different mining chambers representatives. We had civil society, academia, government representatives, and a wide variety of other stakeholders joining from private sector as well. We had 3 learning by doing workshops where we explored how we could apply thinking about the future, or what we call strategic foresight or futures literacy, to reimagine and think about the challenges in the critical minerals ecosystem and how we could navigate that to preferred futures. We also had, after completing the 3 workshops, we had 2 strategic policy dialogues with the stakeholders to talk about and discuss and debate the strategic priorities. And all of those culminated in what I already said were the special report, the 4 of them, and the 1 policy briefing. As I said, we had a variety of stakeholders. And the first of the special reports really explored the barriers and enablers in the region. So if we look at Southern Africa, we have currently a low level of industrialization, while at the same time we have high social inequalities, high commodity dependence, as well as high regional fragmentation. All of this led us to explore different case studies, of which we wanted to accentuate and really point to the key countries that are critical. So in that sense, critical has dual meaning for us in terms of critical minerals, is that we've identified countries that is critical in terms of governance frameworks, regulatory positions, as well as financial challenges, the likes, or industrial challenges, while at the same time looking at where these critical minerals are. The first of which was the copper challenge in the DRC, South Africa, and Zambia. And what we see here is that, as we know, DRC and Zambia are the significant producers of these raw minerals, and China plays an incredibly important role in the exports of these critical minerals. We also looked at the lithium in the DRC, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, and the role Zambia, and the challenges and the barriers and enablers to enhance the supply chain and look at the different status of these lithium in the region. We also looked at cobalt, where we had key discussions on the barriers and enablers for DRC and Zambia in the extraction of cobalt in the region, the challenges. We go into kind of the details of the governance challenges, the geopolitical and geostrategic opportunities and enablers. And we actually looked at that. We also explored graphite in Mozambique and the importance it holds for in terms of grade, quality, and the current policies and programs in place to kind of navigate the graphite challenge and transition in Mozambique. We looked at manganese in South Africa and how we have a lack of capacity for processing as well as a lack of infrastructure investment in terms of making sure we shift towards alternatives in better managing the manganese benefit in the region as well as nickel in Madagascar, South Africa, and Tanzania. So we have several challenges and opportunities here, some of which could be noted here as modest current nickel contributions. Exploration is promising. A lot of battery manufacturers are switching to have more nickel in their batteries. So battery grade nickel there's a deficit currently in grade that's mined here, and there's a renewed interest in these deposits in the region. Then we also focus on the rare earth elements in South Africa and Tanzania. And we had the need to scale up the exploration of these, and the extraction of these is quite complex and potentially environmentally harmful, and looked at some of those dimensions. So what I just mentioned to you is everything that we kind of outline in Special Report 1 that looks at exploring the critical minerals ecosystem in Southern Africa. Special Report 2 really tries to now apply what these challenges and enablers are, and really try to navigate what transition would we need to engage with to achieve the preferred futures. Like Letitia mentioned, we don't have just one future in SADC. We can explore multiple visions and ideas and debates in terms of where we need the region to go, and they are contextualized in different ways in the region, and we need to be open to those potentialities. So in our workshops, we engaged with several stakeholders, and the preferred features of critical minerals in SADC was identified as the financial regulatory framework for inclusion and broad-based development was viewed as very important. We had the importance of decentralized and resilient communities in the region by 2035. We also had sustainable mining and supply chains, which were important for the stakeholders and in terms of contributions in these workshops, as well as the effective control of illicit financial flows and regional integration and trade. However, these preferred futures need to be kind of transitioned towards, and there are several challenges to overcome these, and there are several driving forces that we need to navigate towards transitioning to those preferred futures. I can only mention a few in terms of social, technological, economic, environmental, political, and values. There are challenges in the region, and also obviously present opportunities, but some of which is the social inequalities and community pushback. We've got the technological challenges in terms of digitalization and green tech demand, the economic skills shortages and short-term benefit-focused economics. We've got environmental, there's no circular economy mining currently that we know of, as well as in terms of political, there's definite need for policy improvement. And in terms of values, there's a need for more sustainable mining approaches and state resource capture as being some of the challenges. So having pointed that to you, the work and how we work towards in these workshops, learning by doing workshops, the stakeholders identified high impact key uncertainties that really point to the intersecting and interdependent challenges facing the region, and that might be really impactful, but also highly uncertain developments. And those are the due economic competition by China, US, and the EU for dominance in the green tech value chain. This one was identified as the most important high impact uncertainty. Second was the ability of the SADC states to manage the trade-offs associated with the creation of the regional value chains. Then the urgency and ambition of global policy action on climate. We also had renewable energy or low carbon technological change and the pace of change, as well as the ability of the SADC states to establish attractive investment conditions. Now, we took all of those drivers of change, as well as the high impact key uncertainties, and we actually mapped them on different futures, tools, methods that we used. These futures methods help one to look at the future in multiple ways. And we just, for instance, we then mapped the transition required. So building supportive skills development and innovation ecosystems, or creating a supportive policy and partnership, like the African Green Minerals Strategy that I think was launched recently by the NBC in cooperation with a few other partners. And all of this is to help us achieve the preferred future in which we have the region with a sense of community and justice, where benefits are shared and nobody is left behind. We have a vibrant circular and low carbon economy with zero waste and downstream beneficiation of our minerals to provide critical materials for local use and export. And we have this importance of the African continent that has freed itself from the pitfalls of the resource curse. So those are just an example of the way we mapped in detail the challenges, the business as usual, and the transition required, the systemic innovations required to reach the preferred future. We also created from all of this data points, the kind of a scenario mapping exercise where we see on the one side institutional renaissance, while at the same time we have that in terms of institutional decay. And some of the other high impact key uncertainties was whether we could achieve a cooperative regional economy in the region, or rather than just the greedflation, where you see a lot of greed and protectionist inclinations by certain member states with the combination of what we see, the massive rise in inflation globally as well as regionally. So what we have here, and I don't have the time to go into the details, but the dawn of empowered transformation is the one scenario that we sketched out as the preferred one, and we see some other details here. So this can be read in the special report 2. But when we shift towards special report 3, we really try to reimagine in different ways by applying a new way of thinking and paradigm of what the critical minerals ecosystem could be about in the region, to enable to be a more proactive governance structures that are not as reactive and constantly trying to put out fires, but really create long-term thinking that is beneficial to sustainable development of the mining ecosystem in Southern Africa. Here we critically analyzed the current fault lines in the current future and the future of the green transition. So the importance and the demand for these battery minerals as well as the critical minerals, but there's several fault lines at stake here. And we go into kind of a in-depth discussion of what these are, the importance of energy for mining, the rising costs of energy, as an example. Then we also have the opening to alternative industrial ecosystems, the importance of exploring alternative business models in terms of how the region could industrialize towards more sustainable and equal and socially just futures, as well as the shortcomings of the classical circular economy. Now, as I mentioned, we don't really have at this stage real circular economy mining approaches in the region. But remember, this study is about where we're aiming to get by 2035 towards 2050. And we are saying that in our research, based on works of several thought leaders, the current circular economy approach has several shortcomings in the long term, and we need to enhance that and develop more advanced approaches to the circular economy, especially in the mining industry. So what is required is really a shift to a new paradigm and a way of thinking about mining ecosystems in Southern Africa. So this special report, which is Special Report 3, then strongly advocates for the creation of an alternative economic model and economics for the region in terms of what is called the resource balanced economy. And the benefit of the resource balanced economy is that it focuses on not only the short-term actions, but rather the long-term implications of certain decisions taken today, some of the impacts of the past, of course, but creating better options and decisions today for achieving the resource balanced economy. We're working in this approach with multiple timelines, not just one future, and that these multiple timelines can coexist. And it's also seeking multiple holistic systemic interventions. So here we advocating for the evolution of the circular economy. We also say we need to consider the embedded nature of the energy requirements. We need to optimize resource flows based on technological applications and societal demands. And the resource balanced economy is really about a change in the rules and design of our mining ecosystem, as well as the considerations of logistical energy constraints, while at the same time reorganizing the industrial mining complex and system structures in the long term to achieve long-term resource sustainability and maximizing efficient use. So with that being argued for and advocated in Special Report 3, we are saying, why is there then a need to build anticipatory governance? And we are saying it because it shapes desirable futures and a collective by building collective intelligence networks and making sure that these networks speak to each other in terms of the design and reflexive feedback, so that we can create diverse and really navigate these diverse uncertain futures that we already pointed to in Special Report 2 and 1. The Special Report 1. But we're also saying that anticipatory governance is required because it really helps us to better respond to the events in the present at earlier rather than later stages of development. So it's really a proactive response, a ready-made proactive response. And the real kind of approach here is really opening up to experimentation and learning for new innovative ideas that really is rapidly available to iterate on the learnings and the challenges of failure. So rather the idea that one can control and be in control without ignoring the fact that everything is uncertain and really complex, we advocating with anticipatory governance the idea that governance structures should be more open to failure and planning for failure and learning from these failures in terms of innovation prototypes. So all of this helps us then to get to a state where in anticipatory government you have actually ready-made multiple safe-to-fail options ready in terms of future shocks. When a future shock occurs, maybe in 2035 or 2050, the demand for critical minerals has drastically declined. Maybe we have a discovery of alternative energy sources, or a new technological innovations of energy, and the demand for these critical minerals completely collapse, then we already have ready-made options in place that really helps us to learn and navigate sustainable development in the mining ecosystem. So special report 4 then really just points to these systemic innovations and where we could start imagining and also intervening in a system. So in general, there's systems approaches that try to just make changes, but we try and point in our research to the deeper leverage points that have higher transformative impact, such as the rules, changing the rules of the system, changing how information and transparency could be shared in terms of mining, changing the structures of the mining ecosystem, looking at the goal of the system and really the long-term kind of purpose. Also changing the mindset and paradigm behind the ecosystems in terms of mining. And those are the things that we try and explore in Special Report 4. And then we really create these draft strategic priorities and activities, of which I'll work through and we'll now discuss after my bit. And so the first of our draft strategic priorities are to invest and develop advanced geological surveying capacities. And we'll discuss this later with the panelists. The second is to build and continuously capacitate mineral steward competencies for a resource balanced economy. We also really had an in-depth look at what financial innovations or rethinking financial innovations that will improve access to global markets and change outdated rules and thinking about financial markets to level the playing field towards long-term fair trade. Then we have the fourth of the strategic priorities is this idea of pioneering new mining frontiers by prioritizing bioregionalism. And there you see a shift from focus only on national borders, but we're looking at the ecosystem bioregion and planning in terms of long term of those bioregions, as well as localizing all of these in terms of regional value chains and really building out the regional value chains. The last but not least strategic priority or policy recommendation is that we want to really emphasize the creation of new social contracts with communities.
Dion, I think we've just lost you. If you can hear us. Okay, I think Dion's screen is frozen. Just to capture the last draft strategic priority is to create a new social contract that will build anticipatory governance and enhance dialogue and cooperation on the future of critical minerals in SADC. So thank you very much for that presentation, Dion. It's never easy to condense 4 special reports into 15 slides, but I think you did a sterling job there. The special report also highlights that to know where you are going to, you need to know where you come from. And that's why that history or really understanding the present is so important, especially in futures research. So just to recap a bit on the few policy recommendations before we take a deep dive with our panelists. The first one is to invest and develop advances in geological surveying capacities, build and continuously capacitate mineral stewardship competencies for a resource-balanced economy, invest in and develop critical minerals regional value chains, embed anticipatory governance in regional structures to improve long-termism, and then to strengthen governance through regulatory frameworks and transparency. So now we invite our panelists to respond to a few questions regarding our policy recommendations. First up, we've got Merit. I'm sure as an economist, you're also quite keen to respond on the different economic models. But our first question to you is, the first policy recommendation talks to investing and developing advances in geological surveying capacities. Why do you believe this should be a regional priority? What's your view?
Thank you very much, first of all, for Saya, for inviting me to this very interesting and relevant webinar. We've been working with Dion and his team for quite a while now, and I really like this foresight, not forecast, foresight, knowing the present and anticipating the future, but not like it's a magic spell, but seeing what it is from the present. And I really like, we were part of the stakeholders, and it's good to see that it has come to these reports, which are very compelling. As I was saying at the beginning, I wish I had more time to read through, but from the presentation you've made already, there's so many elements that are very, very compelling. We like this proactive approach, not reactive approach. So we are really excited about this whole work. Specifically on the question that you asked on the geological surveying capacities, of course, at the African Minerals Development Center, we have a whole section dedicated to geological and mineral information system. We have a senior advisor on geological and mineral information system, and that is actually one of our biggest priority, to make sure that we know what is in our ground before we start anything. It's good to know what you have. So for that, we are working with African Geological Surveys. There is an organization of African Geological Surveys that exists, and we're trying to provide capacity to that by creating templates, for example, because data is there, but sometimes it's not harmonized, it's scattered. There's no framework that is you can peer review or exchange, etc. That is not there. So the Organization of Geological Surveys is now actively being there's a workshop, there's a stakeholder group that is working on having harmonized template for the data. But more on the surveying capacities, and really that's also very important. We really need to make sure that we invest in that. There are already existing geological surveys in other jurisdictions. That the most one is being the United States Geological Survey, but we are trying to create our own, like I said, the geological surveys. The data is scattered, but it's there. So it's very important to invest in that in the future, because knowing what you have gives you bargaining power, gives you the asymmetry of information from the mining companies will be reduced, and you will have more. Talking about proactive, you have more proactive insight. And what we're also working on this capacity, on these geological surveys, is going beyond that and making sure that we classify them accordingly. We have the African Minerals Energy and Energy Resource Classification, AMREC, which classifies these resources along the UNFC principles, the United Nations framework for classification. And this is from an African perspective. We classify them not only in terms of their value, but also in the reserves, and also are we value adding? Is it coming back to the sustainability issues? Is it environmental friendly to do that? There are some criteria that are very specific, and then once you create that classification, it's easier to embed them or to put them together with commodities exchanges or stock markets in Africa, and then you have the real value of the mineral itself. So we are working towards that. And just to answer the question is basically it's very important to have geological capacities, geological mineral information systems, surveying capacities, and also classify them in a way that are valued on the world market. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Merit. It also talks to, African countries on the African continent have always been exposed to massive exchange rate fluctuations, which obviously influence the resilience of the economy. And by really understanding, what is under the ground, one can then be in a better position to not accept lopsided agreements. So thank you so much for that. Just another question for you. In your view, what are the barriers to creating a resource-balanced economy where the focus is on equitable and sustainable mineral extraction and embedded advanced forms of circular mining in the region? So you touched earlier on sustainability practices, and I'm sure environmental and sustainability practice within the mining sector, it sort of sounds like two opposites. How does one bring that together?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and as you know, it's a tough and balancing act. As Dion was mentioning, we didn't launch, but actually we unveiled, because to be launched, we have to be gone through our African Union systems. But we unveiled the Africa Green Mineral Strategy, and in that strategy, we highlight some of the issues of balancing, as you mentioned, making sure that we get prosperity through value addition, industrialization, and beneficiation, and creating the jobs necessary, and also transfers of skills and technology. But at the same time, what about the environmental and social impacts on the people? What about the circularity? As you know, mining by nature is harmful well, it touches the environment. So how do we make sure that it's done in a green practices? How do we balance those cost and benefit analysis, not just in terms of monetary, but also what does it mean for the people, and how do we weigh in? And that strategy actually highlights that as well. We have 4 pillars in there. The first one is advancing geological information, infrastructure, all of it. The second one, people and technology. The third one is the value addition and industrialization aspect. And the fourth one is mineral stewardship, environmental, social impact, the women working in the mine, etc. So it's a tough balancing act. And this anticipatory governance that Dion was talking about, and he mentioned something like safe to fail options. I like that, because that kind of thinking, you have to portray proactively what would be the cost and benefit analysis. Because in Africa, for instance, we don't have the same starting point than the Western countries, which are already developed. So they can start with the climate mitigation already, but we are starting from poverty levels that are very high. So we really have to balance out what is it, because we cannot say let's just leave it on the ground, because we need that, because no continent or no country has developed without industrialization, not in this continent, not in Europe, not in Asia. So we have to go through that industrialization and value addition phase, but we have to learn from the mistakes of the past, using less polluting technology. There are so many technologies now, less impact on the communities, and also making sure that these communities are also part of it, making sure that they get the right training, they have the right skills. Sometimes, when companies come to ensure that there's local content policies, even more going to the region, SADC region content policy. Doesn't have to be, for instance, if it's in Mozambique, if you find somebody in South Africa, or if you find somebody in Namibia, we can do a regional content, so to speak. So we really have to balance all of these. And for that, you need, again, this anticipatory governance type of cost-benefit analysis. Where do we want to go? Plan A, B, C, and then see what is the what are the implications, what are the barriers, since you mentioned barriers, what are the solutions, and come up with an optimal solution that is good for the people, but also good for the people in general, but not in terms of poverty only or prosperity, but also on the environmental and social mitigation as well. So it's a balancing act that needs to be really done in a coherent manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miret. My last question to you, and I'm so glad when you spoke about the African Green Mineral Strategy, and you've got 4 pillars, and one of that pillars is people. I think this question talks to that. In your view, what is needed to enable broader and deeper participation in the mining sector, specifically focusing on mining of critical minerals? How do we pull the communities closer to shareholder value?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I meant by saying that when you plan or when you do this analysis, you also have to really put emphasis on the people, the communities on the ground, because usually these minerals are in very remote areas, and then where usually the levels of skills are not really adequate. So you really have to think it through. It has to be a shared responsibility and the shared prosperity. So we have to be inclusive in when we approach this. We should be thinking the 3 pillars: economic, social, and environmental. But we have to go deep also to see the communities. I was recently in, strangely enough, we were discussing these communities on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly at UNGA. And they were, there were questions about, do we need a new business model, new economic business model? Because the one that tells us the rational man, the rational man is satisfying, maximizing its and having this invisible hand. That's not really working. It's not working in terms of environment. It's not working in terms of inclusivity. So we really need to think outside the box. Again, I like this anticipatory and thinking. There's also this donut economics that is coming up now. It takes into account not only the prosperity aspect, but also the social and environmental aspect. But when you should go back to the communities, what is it that you have to build over time? Their skills, the technology. When you invest in these minerals, you have to plan for the skills as well. What kind of skills, they don't all have to become. What about the supply, the procurement, supply, the standards that, companies say usually that they don't satisfy, but you have to build it over time. So we really need some planning on how to tackle the issue of communities. But at the end of the day, even for these mining companies, if the communities around the mines are not happy, it's a bottom line as well. It's not just charity work and not just ESG standards that are check boxes, but it has to be clearly indicated in the long-term planning on how these communities would benefit and how it will trickle down to them. Some of the benefits, there could be some arrangements and some community-based arrangements, but you have to also know who's the leader there and who are benefiting, targeting women in particular as well, because usually women are left behind. So you have to make sure that women are involved, tackling women and seeing this off in the informal society structure. Sometimes the head is not who you think it is. So you have to go through a lot of these planning. So basically we have to have a formula, we have to plan and see how it works for everyone. It has to be a shared responsibility and a shared prosperity for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miret. You've really touched on quite a lot of points there. And I think more importantly, you highlight the need for anticipatory governance within this context, which is a system of systems. One thinks ahead and plans ahead. So I just want to remind the participants, you're welcome to pose questions to Miret. You're also welcome to download the papers from the SAIA website. And with that said, we move on to our next panelist, Setapani, who will provide more of a South African contextual view of the policy recommendations. So Setapani, I'm just checking, are you still with us?
I am. Good afternoon to yourself, Patricia, and everybody online.
Great. Thanks so much. So linking onto Marit's view on building regional surveying capacities, how can South Africa harness increased surveying capacities within the critical minerals and mining sector? And what barriers should we expect just within that South African context?
Thanks once more, and good afternoon to everybody. I think to your point, I would want to align myself with Marit's views around the role of the OAGS, or the African Organization of African Geological Surveys. I think this has got a very important role to play in terms of building capacity across the continent, skills within member states, but also transversing, as we all know, that our geological boundaries are not always as respectful of our political boundaries. And this kind of cooperation is going to be critical for the future of African mineral development. In terms of the South African approach, I think we've done our own analysis and published an exploration strategy in 2022. There is some uneasiness, of course. There's nothing that's ever going to be perfectly perfect, but what's important and what I would want to share with the engagement today is a useful exercise that is undertaken in the development of that exploration strategy, and was a SWOT analysis in the old school management style, and identifying our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which I think would be fairly applicable in the region and if not across the continent. And with regards to the strength and is the endowment. Of course, the endowment is limited to an extent that you have got knowledge of it, and there's always a delineation between what is called by geologists reserves and resources. So your reserves are those which have been properly mapped and are quantified as economically viable for further exploration and for exploitation, and the reserves are those which are generally mapped as part of a general mineral complex. And to the point that Marit was making, the onus is upon geological surveys nationally and in the OAGS to improve our own knowledge of that and move more of that endowment from the general resource to the reserves, so that we can have a better advantage in terms of negotiating concessions with regards to these resources. I'll take a quick segue while I'm talking about these strengths, just to make a point around what I mean about taking advantage of that. If you look at the South African context, we've got provision in our mining legislation, the Mineral, Petroleum Resources Development Act of 2002, as amended, Section 49, which refers to powers of the minister to almost not to sterilize, but to prohibit any exploration or mining in a particular area. And this is a sort of if you look at it away from a disincentive or as a regulation, but towards a situation where geological surveys are then taking that space and that time to do that enhanced work in terms of developing an understanding of what that mineral value is there, could help to really give value when we move away from a FIFA and most mineral jurisdictions are advised to move on a FIFA or first in, first assessed, first in, first served kind of approach towards almost an auction system, and to be able to make that auction system work, where you can place conditions in terms of the law. You do have to have that incentive and the disincentive, and that requires that in-depth geological knowledge. That's the work that the South African Council of Geoscience is trying to do, in particular mineral belts, overlaying different sorts of geological data and increasing the value of that data for the provision of that auction approach. In that auction approach, as I indicated, you would then be able to deal with many of those issues that Marit and that Dion and others have alluded to. Indeed, the invisible hand is not a magical feature, but we do have to meet each other halfway between those who are taking the risk in terms of capital raising, skills, technology, as well as those who are sacrificing historical indigenous land, as well as their own environmental sustainability futures. And that is about raising your own, the value of your own endowments from that reserved resource level. So I think that that's the first point on the strength side. I would want to also indicate there, as was indicated, that we do have a huge history of in Africa, and same in South Africa, of the issuance of prospecting rights, and the experience and the data systems in terms of actually tracking, once you've issued a prospecting right, are people submitting that data? Do you have the systems? As Marit was also, excuse me, my extreme apologies for that. As Marit was also alluding to, do you have the systems to integrate that, to overlay that, so that you also have that data which has been issued in terms of prospecting rights as part of the national endowment. In terms of the weaknesses, I think we were quite upfront that a lot of what we want to do would require us, as I indicated, having a win-win proposal, but one where we are quite clear on our boundaries as well as our needs, but also being very clear about what to do with that endowment once it is discovered, because not all of the minerals that you have in abundance can then be competitively exploited, and not all of them can then be competitively processed. Not all of them can be, from that processing stage, fabricated, and so that is part of the work that the geological societies must do with our R&D societies, such as those within the Minerals Development Council of SADC, as well as in different member nations, helping us to identify those which can be competitively exploited, as well as processed, and then downstream fabricated, and the required infrastructure that would be needed to enable that, because all of this is quite energy intensive at a stage. I mean, not the extraction per se, that is energy intensive itself, but the processing and downstream fabrication absolutely is. So having an understanding, once we're doing that exploration and geological surveying work, as to what we would want to do with those minerals, which ones can I connect, which ones can assist in terms of building those downstream and economic linkages. Let me pause there. I didn't want to go into the opportunities and threats, but just to indicate that that there's a lot of thinking around this and a lot of alignment.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you so much, Setipani, for that comprehensive answer. The next question for you, and upon reflecting on this question, I think maybe it's not a fair question to you, but I'm going to pose it anyway. In all our stakeholder workshops for this research project, there was this recurring theme that came up. And it's about fostering governance and increased regulation and transparent practices within the region. How should we garner political will and commitment to address these governance, or can I rather say these persistent governance challenges?
I think it's a great question to myself. I might not be the one to have all of the answers. I can see that there are a lot of people with experience on the panel as well as in the chat. But if I can just give my 2 cents as obviously the view from South Africa, is that especially within the perspective of critical minerals, we would want to appreciate that the reports that have come out have properly encapsulated our concern of this threat, if you would call it that, and it's a realistic one of this new scramble for Africa. So while we are busy in our different jurisdictions, trying to map our own industrial development, mineral development plans, and trying to create a framework which would be fair for stakeholders, social partners, as well as one that would respect our commitments to, in the case of Africa, a better region, a better continent, and a better world. We are seeing that there is a deliberate and a very transparent effort for different nations to engage us in individualistic and less idealistic, if you will, in partnerships. And there's if you look at all of the critical mineral strategies, and we've done our own benchmarking, whether it's the US or it's China or across the EU, all of them are looking at what they're calling supply chain insecurities. And supply chain insecurities is exactly what is being discussed in this series. It's about where countries are talking about, or regions talking about, we don't want, again, to be a price taker. We don't want just for people to come in or concessions to go out and things to be exported without any real say as to how they would be integrated in local economies and benefit local communities. Those are real threats that have been documented. It's not a theory, but that kind of a thought process is threatening their supply chains in terms of what they would think is their economic defense and developmental futures. So it is something that we should be aware of. It's not something that we should shy away from, but just be aware that it's necessary that we do intensify this work with that understanding that in the meantime, there are those bilateral engagements that are going on. And countries and governments do have a responsibility to do what is best for their own citizens. And that's, I'm not going into the political space, which is not my forte, but it's part of that dynamic when you've got a mandate from the populace, and a democratic mandate is to do what is required from you in that period and to bring the benefits. And that might not always gel in with what a long-term regional plan and integration plan is. And so that is just something that I think we should be aware of. And there's another point on that. We are seeing globally as well with this climate border adjustment mechanism, that CBAM, that countries or regions are quite overt, if not overt, but covert in terms of the issues of their own national priorities or their own people's benefits, because it is to the benefit of certain regions to ensure that there is that constant flow as per their critical mineral strategies of raw materials, and to discourage what might be more energy intensive, but also skills intensive and and to the benefit of Africa, downstream beneficiation, which would be discouraged through the CBAM, but at the same time, having those critical mineral strategies and those concessions and those engagements and partnerships, which would ensure raw materials imports in the meantime, because we would see that in the first round, second round of the CBAM, it's not raw materials that are really going to be penalized in terms of exports.
Great. Thanks so much, Setapani. You've actually touched on the next question, or I think it leads really well into the last section that we'll address with you, which is, why is there a need for a new social contract to focus on enhanced cooperation on the future of mining critical minerals in the region?
I think that's it's almost self-evident in a mining jurisdiction like South Africa. There's, as I indicated, that history, that old history of mining investment and investors seen as, and I think one of our big tourist attractions being a big hole in Kimberley is a good marker of the same, but seen as rather extractive and leaving behind ghost towns, and in more recent history, that same tension around coal mining and the pressure around the move away from coal mining and the stress that's put upon those mining towns in the coal belt. All of that has created a great divide between the partners in development, be it the investors, the government that regulates and issues those rights, as well as the traditional leaders that would oversee the consultations, etc. So I think it's important that as we try to move to a new future, we can re-engage. We say within our stakeholders and our stakeholder engagements that it's not like in other jurisdictions, for example, maybe Australia, just to be flippant, where there could be mining that's taking place with no communities in place. In South Africa, all mining takes place within a municipality, within a community, and often with a traditional leader. And as Marit had rightly said, it's not always very cut and dry, that leadership, but the need for investment and for development to actually be seen as a partner is critically important. And it's important from both sides, as currently it is. It's something that is commonly highlighted by investors as a concern, the community tensions, the strife, labor, as well as illegal mining once there's mining that's moved out. So there is a win-win in terms of a realignment and a renegotiation of that social compact to engage on what is the responsibilities and the commitments of government national, government local, the investors and the communities and local leadership, and what is the plan during the exploration, the mining, as well as the post-mining period to amplify the benefits, minimize the risks, and to ensure a lasting legacy that is more than just the environmental devastation, as has been the case previously.
Thank you so much, Setapani. Your insights provide very insightful perspectives. Thank you so much for that. And then we move on to our last panelist. Last but not least, we have Calasius. So very much in the media, we read about geopolitical forces aiming to make their value chains more resilient. And we also hear about, shortening value chains for environmental impacts. the question, Kalesius, is why should prioritizing bioregionalism in regional value chain development be considered?
Thank you, Letitia, and again, thanks to Saya for inviting me to the panel. It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure how best one could answer it, but perhaps the simple answer would be the fact that because things have changed, things are no longer the same. I remember when studying economics, not very long time ago, we were looking at economic growth models that were talking about a certain growth path and all of that. And you thought if African countries actually followed what the developed nations had actually done, we might actually arrive at the same place. And I think as Marit had mentioned, we no longer get the same results. There's not a single way to actually achieve this. The world is more dynamic. And so you really have to consider all things when undertaking any economic activity. And by doing so, I think the bottom line will always be, how do we benefit the most out of this? And who actually benefits? We all know that. I think as a region, we have identified the issues of environment, climate change, and all these things in some of our key blueprints. So it's there, but really it's about how do we benefit? How do we make the most out of it? So it's interesting, for instance, as a region that we have, when you look at one of the newer strategies that we have developed, which was approved this year, is the circular economy. And so it realizes that there's no linear way, of course, to development. We can't undertake value chain development in the manner that other nations might have done that. We now have to consider all issues and make sure that we actually. So I think in the end, really, the prioritization of bioregionalism, it's really about extracting, the most benefit out of our resources. If you look at the global economy, obviously, if you consider all issues being undertaken, say, among the developed nations, and you applied the principles of sustainable development and all these measures, you want to do them, what they have there is development. What we have here is underdevelopment. So you might actually reinforcing underdevelopment or sustainable underdevelopment instead of sustainable development, because you're trying to apply the same measure. So it's really about us considering all issues in developing our respective nations at a regional level, that we have to take into account all opportunities and we make sure the people would benefit. Our main challenges that we know, of course, or that have been prioritized, of course, is to reduce unemployment, to reduce inequality, and ultimately poverty. So any activity or any project or initiative that we have to embark on has to be aimed at reducing these three. So really, then, therefore, the summary of it is that the prioritization has to always center on us getting the most out of our resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalesius. We've got a question from the audience for you. So I, just in the interest of time, I'm going to pose that question, which is, how can SADC hold its members to account regarding governance of minerals to bring them onto a common strategy as outlined? And does it really have the power to do so?
I wish Stefania would answer that. She's speaking as a member state, and I'm speaking as secretariat. And I'm supposed to answer whether we have powers and who is SADC and so on. Well, okay. Of course, as a regional community, we are a community. And we seek to harmonize our policies, our strategies, and our laws to ensure that our development is equally shared and that no one is left out. Of course, we have instruments that we use to ensure that we do not, in a way, disadvantage one another as we seek development. And this is meant at the highest level, of course, is summarized in the protocols, respective protocols that we have. Of course, we have had one of the old protocols we have is the protocol on mining. Sadly, I think it's been overtaken by time, but just to show that indeed this is the blueprint or more of a legal, it is a legal instrument because it becomes a domestic law once you adopt it in terms of the Vienna Convention, as you know. These are the instruments we use to ensure that we are harmonized and that each member state is actually able to do what is expected of them. Now, obviously, what happens when member states are not in keeping with the protocols, right? These issues are prescribed in the treaty in terms of what happens when a member state is not in keeping with the established protocols, that measures would be taken in terms of engaging the same member state to ensure that they actually come through. Because some of them do not willingly just do this. I mean, we have a variable geometry situation in the region. So you are not always going to have each member state pulling its weight at the same time. There might be instances where they don't. But overall, we are guided by this instrument. And these are the ones that then obliges each member state to do what they actually, we agreed as a region. Perhaps that's the best answer, perhaps the weakest one I would offer for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We don't have any more questions from the audience, but I've still got one more question for you, Cassius, and I think we've still got time. What do you believe are the next steps that should be taken regionally to build anticipatory governance in the critical minerals ecosystem?
I think I might combine it with one, there's a comment I might have seen on the chart, which is very interesting. What are we doing in terms of what could possibly be the future critical minerals? I attended the launch of the African Critical Mineral Strategy, I believe, I hope I got that one correct, Marie. Where some of the discussions centered around they are critical for who, all right? And I think that's really an important issue that we should really discuss. We know for now, as a matter of fact, that those terms originate from countries that are actually utilizing these minerals, and to them they are actually critical. But are they actually critical for us, and in what way are they actually critical to us? Is it just a form of us extracting the maximum value when processing, when manufacturing, and then selling to the rest of the world? Probably not. So I would offer an example before I get actually to the question of some of the issues we have looked at in the region. We undertook some work on identifying some potential projects for investment, focusing on the cobalt value chain or energy storage, if you like, overall, though that includes, of course, issues of copper and so on. So we're looking at 3, and we identified a number of projects in it. But what has come to light is that definitely these minerals can actually be critical to our own needs. When you talk energy storage, you're really talking about, if you look at Africa, half of its continent, half of the population of this continent are in the dark. What do they need? Do they need industrial power, baseload power, and all this heavy duty power? Probably not. They just need basic lighting. They just need light. Lower energy to actually do what they could do. And how can you actually meet that? You can actually meet that from the current minerals that we have. So all of a sudden, you realize the minerals are critical to us, both in terms of their final use and in terms of their intermediate use or production and processing. And so that's really an exciting kind of work that we have undertaken, and in looking at how critical are these minerals, so on, if you like. So, what are the next steps going forward? I think I've alluded to that. But of course, I've had issues of governance. I've had issues of, there's a new term I saw, which is greenflation and all this. What are we doing in terms of that? I think a key feature, one of the key issues I saw, I think in Dion's presentation, related to the issue of research and development or technology. We are a continent that has not really invested in that. Your ability to withstand the challenges of uncertainty is also really related to your ability to have invested in research and development or knowledge. I think we know how COVID, or somehow COVID taught us a lesson, that because we didn't have the knowledge or the know-how, I don't know which one, we were reliant on the rest of the world to actually help us. And so it's an area that we have not invested heavily. And I think it's one area that we are keen to really push through, because we know that's really where the future really, that's really the future. Now, before that and before everything else, perhaps, I don't know if it's something that has been touched in the 4 papers. As SADC, in our regional indicative strategic development plan, RISTI, for the period 2020-2030, we have a number of pillars that we have highlighted. But above them all, we have said our plan has to be founded on peace and security in the region. Of all other things considered, without peace and security, we are saying we wouldn't be able to achieve the sort of development we desire. And we are definitely not going to gain any much from the resources that we have. So we have to prioritize as key steps going forward the issue of peace and security for the region, because that secures everything. And that's one. And I think the constant review of we are so, how should I say, accustomed either to 5-year strategic plans, 10-year strategic plans, or 1 year, whatever. But I think we definitely live in a dynamic world. So you always have to constantly review to really look at what is obtaining on the ground in the world. And then I think use that to anticipate what could possibly be the change. I think that's really a new approach we need to adapt to quickly always. I mean, of course, the access to data is critical to that and how you process that. So the issue of data gathering for the sake of intelligence, either on the global, our own economies and so on, is really critical. It's an area that we are keen to invest. Marie's talked about thinking outside of the box. Certainly, it's very interesting in Africa.
Sorry, I need to ask you to wrap up your last point. We've just got a few more questions from the participants, and I need to get those out.
Fine. No, I'll just stop here then.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to reiterate what you've said. I think if one looks back at macro history or key points in our history, there's lots of war followed by globalization. What happens after globalization? And you've mentioned that SADC is positioning for peace and security. What happens if that does not materialize? And those are the key benefits of pushing anticipatory governance within this highly uncertain environment in which we find ourselves. So thank you so much for your answers, Kailash. It's always so insightful and great to hear you to hear your perspectives. We've got a question for Marit. Marit, the question is, are there any best practices on extraction and production of critical minerals on the African continent? Maybe you can address that question for us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not too sure if I'm the one who should be answering this, but as I saw Dion's response there, that their best practice is still I don't think we've reached that best practice yet anywhere in the world, actually. And I see that there are some responses there about some companies having achieved best practice. I really need to see those ones. So we are leaning towards good practices, let's just put it that way. But if to talk about best practice, especially in the processing and the production, we need to do more, I believe. And I honestly, I can't come up off the cuff of a best practice at this point, where there is well done processing, the one that we mentioned earlier, where we took into consideration the environment, mitigation, the communities, the prosperity, etc. But we are leaning towards that, and as we were saying, we are anticipating that we need to develop some standards and some guiding principles, but also mostly we have those regulatory frameworks and we have those policies, but enforcement again and again is the issue in Africa most of the time. We do have a lot of Kalishas was mentioning all of the SADC protocols, we have our own Africa Minerals Governance Framework, which outlines the best practices or options, because it depends on what and how it should be done. Are you doing this and that? But are we really doing them? Are we enforcing them? On the mining side, on the company side, on the industry side, they have these ESG principles. ENS usually are okay. They all have now the sustainability reports, but the G side, governance side, is it really being done the way the processing should be done? There's some who mentioned Anglo-American and others who are doing it, but I mean, do we really have best practices, especially on our continent? I'm not too sure, because we are leaning towards that. So on a positive note, we are leaning towards that. There was a bit of a mention of the DRC and Zambia doing this processing plant, and they're now developing a special economic zone. There is a pre-feasibility study that is being done on the special economic zone, and it was kind of unveiled recently again in New York at the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And so we are hoping that these new ones that we have processing in these countries, special economic zone, would trigger some kind of best practice. So because we learned from the experiences of the past what should be done, what should not be done, we have all the regulatory frameworks, we have the tick boxes even. So now it's about enforcing and monitoring. So there are some good practices and there are some very standards. EU has the most specific ones, but also others have the due diligence guidelines of OECD. I'm sure SADC also has some regulatory frameworks on this point, but are they really doing them on the ground? Are they really going through what we talked about, the communities, the shared responsibility, all of these things? Are they doing it, or are they doing it? Are we monitoring it the right way? Are we doing it? And somebody was talking about cadasters as well. We do have cadasters, and to do that, you need to do all of these environmental impact assessment, environmental and social impact assessment. All of these things are there on paper, but let's be practical and see how are they enforced? How are they being handled? Are they being monitored? So these are the crucial questions, and then we can come up with some best practices along the way. And we hope that there will be more that will give examples of these best practices more prominently after we have done these. Because there, as you know, there's not much processing being done locally so far. So those best practices will have to come when the processing and we have added value and we have processed and it's done in a sustainable manner. Then we can have best practices. But the examples we have currently are mostly raw materials being exported outside. So the ones that we want the processing and extraction done in a sustainable manner on the continent, we still hopefully will have those in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Merit. I just want to add to what you've said. You spoke about enforcing, monitoring, and I'd like to add and anticipating what could go wrong, what could work. So I think, you know, we've got all these, as mentioned earlier, we've got all these policies and frameworks, but it sort of needs, call it another layer of driving foresight within the region. I see Setapani's hand is up. You can go ahead, Setapani.
I'm so sorry, I was quite unprocedural, but I just wanted to add to Uzima's question and also aligning myself with Merit, just to add another perspective that from our experience, and we are dealing with mainly we're dealing with the mining industry, but also the processing and trying to encourage beneficiation. And it's not always that you would see a vertically integrated operation. So I just wanted to add that that perspective that we are also, when we're looking at a best practice, as Maritin and Uzima were also referring to, that it doesn't have to be every investor who comes in for exploration would do the production, would do the processing on site, would do the fabrication. It's their willingness and their availability to be linked into the local or regional value chains. So we see, for example, and I wanted to raise one that I just visited, and I thought it would be very disingenuous of me not to share this example as others are sharing their own, of a company out in Nelspruit in Bombela in the Mpumalanga province, which is processing manganese that is then mined in the Northern Cape, and it used to be moved by rail, but there's some challenges there, and this is one of those issues that we have to also think about as governments, is that we have the enabling logistics and other infrastructure to enable that local beneficiation, that best practice we want to see. Historically, they were able to move the shipments of manganese mined in the Northern Cape all the way out to Nelspruit, which is further northeast of the Northern Cape, and that is where there was reliable energy for them. That's where most of our coal belt is, and all of the power stations are, and that's where they had affordable, reliable energy, and they've been producing intermediate products from manganese, from your sulfates to electrolytes, and these are used in all sorts of applications, from lithium-ion batteries or from batteries to welding, electronics, chemicals, and so that is, in our perspective, in itself a best practice. They don't mine there, but they are able to utilize something that is mined within South Africa and draw from other regional inputs to produce an intermediate good. They are working with the University of Limpopo, Department of Science and Innovation, to see if they can further down the value chain, employing young people, highly energized, highly skilled people. And so I just wanted to make the point, and also to link to Kennedy's point, that it's not that we don't have skills and that there's no R&D at all happening. It's just a matter of how we link it. A lot of the times, if I can be very frank on this call, that we've got our science councils going out on bilaterals or on partnership engagements in the region, There's a lot of excitement about the ability, whether it's from Council for Geoscience or MinTech or the CSIR, about the abilities to collaborate. And then comes the issue of funding. And these skills do need to have funding to be retained. The projects do need to be funded to be viable. And as soon as there is an external funder to that project, then we see that regional integration in terms of the regional or the continental skills being delinked. So just wanted to add that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Setapani. We still have a few questions on the Q&A, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But Dion has kindly shared his email address on the chat. To all the participants, you're welcome to drop us a line if you've got any questions or additions, or if you are just curious about anything. Just a very huge thank you from my side to all our panelists. I see Dion's hand is up. Dion, over to you.
No, and just in short, thank you everybody for joining. Please reach out to us. There's more research required on many dimensions of the critical minerals ecosystem. We do not try to address all of them, but our reports might address some of them. Please go explore and see if you can find them. Please reach out to us. We have, we'd love to have the continuous discussion, and please engage with the strategic priorities and strategic activities that we maybe can grow and extend into something that might be regionally implementable and actionable. So those are, there's very good questions asked that we probably need to further explore and research. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dion. So just a huge thank you to our panelists for creating the space and time in your busy schedules. We appreciate it and we value your contributions. I think each one of you just provided such a rich experience, and thank you for sharing that with us today as we collectively shape our societies. I also wish to thank the audience for your participation and contribution as we build on creating knowledge in the futures of critical mining in the SADC region. And I thank you all. Goodbye.